it's Chris Fleming. Welcome back to this month's edition of Spirit Talk. Our guests this month are accomplished soul travelers that have been practicing out-of-body travel for several decades. They are both published authors and spiritual teachers who help to educate about a highly freeing form of advanced spiritual travel to the heavens. Other topics they enjoy teaching about are self-realization, God realization, reincarnation, and how to become a spiritual traveler and return to God. Now, they both thoroughly enjoy assisting individuals in their travels and experiences of extraordinary worlds of consciousness in the heavens. Please welcome to the show spiritual teachers and travelers, our Vardankar, Alan Feldman, and Heather Giamboi. Welcome, guys.
Hi, glad to be here.
Great to be here, Chris.
Now, I noticed...
We really appreciate you having us on.
No problem. I noticed there's a little bit of a high-pitched sound. Is that just your
I noticed
microphone?
that, too. I was a little concerned about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure
I have
what
no
that
idea
was.
what's causing that.
I tried to... I spoke through it.
Yeah, I know. It was really loud. It was like a dog whistle. Holy words.
Piercing sounds. In this podcast, we're going to discuss the topic of out-of-body travel to heaven with Alan and Heather. So to begin, guys, this is fascinating to me because I've had some out-of-body experiences. They've been very awakening and very spiritual. Can you tell me how you guys got involved in this out-of-body travel?
Well, for me personally, I was doing a lot of searching, a lot of spiritual searching, and I was in our art college, and I found all that I could find, and I just felt like no matter where I looked, or no matter how hard I practiced, I couldn't find the answer that I was looking for. Something was missing. My question was, what is the very highest that people are capable of? And one day I just sort of had a breakdown, and I said, God, if there is a God, please show me a real teacher. And then shortly after that I was guided. I had this guidance to leave my art college and go to a completely different university. And at that point I closed my eyes in the library, and I reached out and I asked, what am I ready for now? And my hand went to a book. And the moment my hand touched the book, I had this out-of-body experience where I felt myself in a flash in this brilliant, white, incredible world of total awareness, this pure, positive God world. And it was so profound, and I knew without words or any language that was exactly what I was looking for. And from then on, I've had a lot of very profound, life-changing experiences that completely altered the way I view spiritual reality.
How did you feel when you had this? Did you think, oh my God, am I going crazy? Am I, who do I know is in charge of this experience? What were you thinking?
Well, I began at that point working with what are called spiritual travelers, which are these advanced, highly advanced but little known spiritual teachers or masters in the art of or science of Tuzer or soul travel. And what it is, it's almost like a sort of like a spiritual apprenticeship that I was involved in for several decades. And it's very, very spiritually advanced. Actually, there's one experience I can give which can give a sense of the interestingness of this. But basically, it's been a long journey, and it goes deeper and deeper. The more we practice, the deeper it gets. I can give you an example, which is pretty interesting. I once had this really this experience where I attended a large conference, a convention center. Those huge convention centers with the big ceilings. And all of this, I was just looking out at the crowd of people, thousands of people, and I was feeling a deep feeling of appreciation and awe for each soul there. And I was feeling so much love in my heart for each person there that it was just swelling. And then the next thing I knew, I was kind of shocked because I suddenly realized that I was hovering 200 feet above on the ceiling. And I had this bird's eye view of the entire convention center, and this is when I was practicing this. I had been practicing this for a little while, and I was hovering above like a bird, and I was kind of shocked when I was realizing that I was on the ceiling 200 feet up. But what was really weird was not that I was on the ceiling, but I noticed that my body was sitting in the chair, my physical body was sitting in the chair. But then right above it were these 5 other bodies. And like the one right above my physical body was this astral body, what people call the light body, and it was glowing and it was more spirit. And then right above that body was another body that was even finer and more spirit called the causal body, which corresponds to the plane of the Akashic records. And then above that was another body, which was like a body of light, which was the mental body, and then the etheric body, and then me as soul, as pure soul, a spark of God, hovering on the ceiling. And then the moment I realized this, and I was startled, and I saw these 5 bodies below me, immediately the bodies went into each other, almost like those Russian dolls where one doll goes into the next doll, goes into the next, and then I was boom right in my chair, and I was like, whoa, when I realized what had happened. But the reason that I share that experience is because each of these bodies corresponds to a different level of heaven. There's not just one heaven, but there are different levels of heaven, which we learned about in our studies.
Now, in describing these, okay, and I'm well aware of the different levels. I'm not aware enough to know exactly what level is which. I got a general idea from some of my experiences. But I want to go back just slightly. You were talking about, and then we're going to get to Alan, have Alan chime in as well, is you're talking about these 5 different bodies that you were floating and you saw these 5 different bodies. Now, did they represent a part of you?
What it is as soul, who we truly are is soul, a spark of God. The bodies are sort of like, Alan G. once made a good example of this when he said that these bodies are sort of like a diving suit. You know, that in order to withstand the coarse vibrations and interact with this matter world, we have to have almost like this body suit to wear to interact with the lower worlds. So,
oh, really?
So it's sort of like, a fish in water needs a fish type of body to interact with the water world, and a bird needs a bird type of body to interact with the air world. Well, it's the same with us in the astral world, for example, which is composed of more spirit. We need the astral body, which it has more spirit, so it's a lot finer, but it's what we need in order to maybe interact with that world. So these bodies help us to, like a diving suit, like Alan once said.
I never even thought of that. Now, for people that don't fully comprehend out-of-body experiences, a lot of people might think, well, it's a near-death experience, you must be dead. But that's not the case, because we're dealing with consciousness here. Can you and Alan explain, and I want to introduce Alan, for those not knowing, is both Alan and Heather have written a couple books, and the book is one of them, Thousands of Visits to Heaven and the Heart of God, the most profound, vividly detailed out-of-body discoveries yet. Both Alan and Heather wrote this book. They also wrote Dialogues with the Masters, the way back to God via soul flight, such as out-of-body and astral travel. Now, how do you go about leaving your body and visiting these planes so our listeners can understand? I mean, can anyone learn this?
Sure. You mind if I say a little bit?
Go ahead, Alan.
Well, I think when we're very, very young children, we naturally have, a lot of people naturally have these abilities. It's very common for kids to daydream. It's very common for babies to have this, if you look in the eyes of a baby, you see this innocence, this spark. And there's something special about very young children, especially babies, especially if they've grown up in a normal family, a loving family. And there's something about them, and it's like a lot of times we get it beaten out of us, like if we're in school and we're daydreaming, and you have a little child and he's traveling with a dragon, or he's out in space, or he's doing something, and the teacher tries to bring him back to Earth and bring him to the classroom where they're maybe learning addition or something like that. So this leaving the body is a natural thing. It's actually not leaving the body is unnatural. But we've sort of got everything reversed from our training and from the fears that we've been taught. And so we carry all these bodies with us simultaneously. And we're already in these other worlds. We're just, for the most part, not conscious of it. So I hope that answers a little bit. It's like simply placing your attention upon these planes. And what we do, and of course there's a whole study of this. I'm not going to say it's so simple that you don't need any practicing, you don't need any study. But it's as simple as just placing your attention, for example, the sound current. There's a sound which is, we can demonstrate that later. The audible, we call it the audible life stream, or the Varden. And there's this light and sound that comes flowing from the higher worlds, from the pure positive God worlds, and it flows down into these various vibrations, these lower and lower vibrations. We can grab a hold of the returning wave through certain exercises, and we can actually ride it higher and higher into these various planes and have these experiences ourselves. We can also be escorted by one of the true spiritual travelers. So the travelers can actually take us into these various planes where we can have our own experiences in these planes. There are also what they call golden wisdom temples, where we can go. These are like centers located in the various planes where we can study the Shariat Kihyure under a true Varden master who's in charge of the temple. So there's a whole system of learning, and each plane, we're simultaneously having these experiences already. It's a question of becoming aware of them.
Yeah. Talk about travelers. Talk about, said earlier, Heather, these different levels, that there's more than one heaven. I want to focus on both of those things so we can break this down. Is you mentioned in your book that there are 12 levels of heaven leading to understanding self and God realization. So if there's these various levels, can you talk about these?
Well, yes, actually, first I should state that there are levels that are the what we call the lower worlds, or MEST heavens, MEST, matter, energy, space, and time, and in these levels of heaven, they're very beautiful. They're very beautiful. Some of them get higher and higher in vibration, but they're still composed of matter and time, even though it has the illusion or the appearance that it's timeless or that it's matterless. The higher we go. So, and then beyond that, there's sort of like what you'd call the second grand division, which is a division between those lower worlds or lower heavens and these pure spirit planes, which are called the pure positive God worlds. And they are matterless, and they are completely beyond time and space. And so I'll give you like a brief overview. A lot of people, when they have a near-death experience, astral projection, dreams, they communicate with celestial entities. They often experience what's called the astral plane, which is a tremendous plane. It has hundreds and thousands of different regions within it, or subplanes within it. It's actually much larger than the physical universe. I mean, if you can imagine how large the physical universe is. And because it's composed of more spirit, it's more spacious and more matterless, and things manifest much more quickly in the astral plane. But the higher you go in the astral plane, the more light and the more heavenly the sound, and the more magical. And because actually the astral plane is also the heaven of emotion. It corresponds with the astral body, which is the emotional body. And above that is the causal plane, which a lot of people know about the Akashic records, and the Akashic records, which are like a warehouse of records of our past lives and future lives, and it shows past, present, and future. It's like a warehouse of our karma and our incarnations.
Mm-hmm.
And some people have the experience of visiting this plane, and they can actually almost see on what would appear to be like a movie screen, or it appears differently for different people, but they can actually view their past lives there. And then above that is, and as we go up, the planes become more luminous and more heavenly and more matterless the higher we go. So the mental plane, it's basically, instead of doing astral projection, people do things like mind travel. And because there's even less matter, things manifest even more quickly. And I forgot to mention that there are different colors of light. We can kind of identify where we are. If we see like a very beautiful white light, maybe with a subtle blue in it, that could be indicative of the mental plane. Or if we see a very white, white light, and with a light pink to it, that's an astral kind of a color to the plane. And on the mental plane, some of the great thinkers were actually visiting the mental plane, like Einstein. The universal mind power is on the mental plane. It's a place of deeper knowledge or deeper awareness. And then above that is the etheric plane, which is a purplish color. And those lower worlds, or messed worlds, matter, energy, space, and time worlds, exist in what we call the lower worlds, and they become more and more profoundly beautiful the higher we go in them. But the problem with the lower worlds is that they are regions of great wisdom mixed with illusion. So there are illusions, traps, detours, all kinds of things, and that's why it's very important to work with a guide. And then when we work with a spiritual guide, the spiritual travelers, they've taught us how to work through these different planes, visit them, and so forth, until we come to what is called the pure positive God world, which is beyond the second grand division. And for instance, the soul plane is the first plane of it's the first heaven of self-realization, where instead of being encapsulated in these different bodies, like the astral body or the physical body, we are pure soul, our true self, a spark of God. And we experience who we truly are in this heaven of self-realization. And it's just an incredible world of pure white light that goes on in all directions forever.
Can I just
Yes.
I just wanted to add a little bit.
Okay.
Soul knows through direct perception. So soul doesn't require a mind at that stage when you reach the soul plane and beyond. And soul has beingness, seeing, knowing, and being. So we're no longer gaining impressions through the lower bodies, like the mind or the subconscious body. So soul is the first. That's our true self.
Right.
And soul is eternal. It has no beginning or end. Soul is also identical in substance to spirit or God. Everything below that is a mixture of matter. It's simply a body. In other words, when you're talking about the astral body or the etheric body or the mental body or the physical body, they're all finite. They're all eventually going to expire or translate. So when you hit the soul plane, you're aware of yourself as pure soul. You're now in this eternal state. That's the real you, and everything below it is temporary. Although some of these bodies live a very, very long time, they give the illusion of being eternal. I just wanted to clarify
an excellent point. And
go ahead, Heather, and then I want to ask you guys a question in regarding to an experience I had. So.
Oh no, you can ask now.
A few years ago, I think it was back in 2005, I was doing a show called Dead Famous. They wanted me to connect with Bing Crosby, and it was something that I hadn't done before, where there was a hypnotherapist that was going to hypnotize me, put me into a regressive, relaxed state, and then have me communicate. And I'm like, okay, I've gone under hypnotism before and gone back to my childhood to some paranormal experiences. I said, so this will be interesting. What happened remarkably was, and they said I was under for maybe 2 hours, 45 minutes, 2 hours.
Wow.
To me, there was no such thing as time. I couldn't sense any time. But all I remember is I wake up consciously, and I'm in this completely white room, and there's no corners to the room. It's all white, and you would assume by looking at it that it's just a specific space. Yet there was a part of me that realized it was endless. It continued to go, that there weren't walls, but I was only seeing what was occupying that specific space. And in that space there was a bunch of chairs going around almost like in a slightly bent horseshoe. I would see people appear and then disappear, and then someone new would appear in that chair, and then some chairs were empty, and then someone would appear in those chairs. And these individuals, male or female, were sitting completely straight with their hands on their legs, looking straight ahead. And I would watch how some of them would appear, then they would disappear, and there'd be these 3 tall buildings that were, beings that were in the center of us. These beings were maybe 7-8 feet tall. They were wearing white pearlescent robes. They were very thin and narrow. And, I made a joke that it looked like they had these glowing fish balls on their head. And these fish bowls were completely bright white light. I knew just by being there, number one, I felt like I was not supposed to be there. 2, I felt like these were highly super intelligent, evolved beings that you do not argue with them. Whatever they tell you, you have to abide by. As I sat there, I'm watching and I'm like, oh no, do they know I'm here? Am I supposed to be here? A soul appears next to me, a male soul, and I look at him and he says, I am the soul that was known as Bing Crosby. Yet I have had many names and many lives. And all of a sudden these flashes start going in my head. He was a female, he was a male, he died as a child. He was like all these different lives. It was happening so fast I couldn't even keep up.
Beautiful experience.
And that was it. And then all of a sudden, these beings walked towards me, and I got slightly scared. I would say it's more intimidated, like, oh boy. And then I came out of it. And that's it. It was just that. I'll never forget that. I did a drawing of it, a sketch of that. While he didn't tell me anything pertaining to these questions I had, he was saying to me, that life is gone. I'm now experiencing other things, but that was only one fraction of who I truly am. And I had never consciously understood that or knew anything about that. I thought we are who we are, and we are that for eternity. But he was telling me, no, that person, that physical body that was known as Bing Crosby was only a partial part of who I am.
Exactly.
Can you add upon that or explain that for me?
You mind if because I'm like jumping up and down. This is so.
Go ahead.
This is so fascinating. It's really interesting. Now you had a very profound experience. It's very obvious that what you had was a rare chance to get a glimpse into some of these inner workings that most people don't see until they translate. Or translate is the word we use in Verdenkirch for the body passes on the physical body. Well, it comes down to this, if I can try to explain this. Most people are on what's called the Wheel of 84, which is a series of almost endless reincarnations. And so people will reincarnate in the physical world, in different planets, different dimensions of the physical, the Earth, various planets, various places. They'll also incarnate sometimes on the astral plane, and those have many different levels, as Heather was saying. But this Wheel of 84 is like this great wheel where soul experiences millions upon millions of incarnations, and we experience everything. We experience different planets, different sexes, different astrological signs, different dispositions, different personality temperaments, just as your dream was indicating. Now, there's a whole series of integral, I don't know what you call it. It's like a series of, they call them the Lords of Karma. And these beings basically judge various souls and then assign them to their next lifetime.
Wow.
Yeah, and whether that lifetime is another planet or it's a physical.
Wow.
Also, they assign conditions. For example, let's say somebody's a rich person, in a lifetime, and they're they mistreat poor people, and they don't have any compassion for poor people. Then the Lords of Karma may decide that they're going to be poor, so that they can develop compassion for those that are having trouble eating, finding food money, and being able to survive. That's just a very primitive example. They also deal with bringing people together. For example, if there's a man and a woman and they're very much in love with one another, and then the man dies prematurely and the woman pines his death, if there's that love bond, which is usually a karmic bond, the Lords of Karma may put them together, but often in an unexpected way. She may end up being the daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and he might be her mother.
Right.
And because they're learning that love, that unconditional love and surrender. So now that's one track that we all go through that. The souls all go through that. But there's another way to do this besides going through that long, arduous journey of soul, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. And that method is the way of out-of-body projection, or out-of-body Tusa travel, or soul travel. And in that method, instead of going through this endless hoop of reincarnation after reincarnation and trying to develop qualities, what we do is we leave the body and we go directly to these different planes. And we're able to resolve an enormous amount of karma, but we're also able to mature at a very rapid rate, because everything down here is a school.
Right.
And you can go the slow way, which is the way of reincarnation and karma, which takes a long time. Or if there's certain souls that are aware that this is not their true home. They know that the Earth isn't their true home. They know that the other planetary stars and the UFOs and the space people, they know that's not their true home. They know that the astral plane isn't their true home. They know that the lower worlds are not their true home, and they want to return to God itself.
See, yeah, that's how I feel. That's how I've always felt. Yeah.
And so for somebody like you, leaving the body and projecting into these various planes is the shortcut. It's the most direct path. It's not the only path, but it's by far the fastest path. Now, the only problem with some of the New Age teachings is that they have dead ends. In other words, there'll be a guru and he'll teach you how to go to the astral plane. Like he'll teach astral projection, or he'll teach you how to go to the causal plane. So you go to the causal plane. The teachers can only lead you up to the level that they've achieved.
Absolutely.
So if you have a teacher that's going to go to the causal plane, that's great. You might need just such a person to reach the next level up, or to experience whatever you need to experience under him or her. So you go through that experience. You go to the astral, you go to the causal. You have all these experiences. That's great. But then it's like the end of the train line.
Mm-hmm.
You see, now with the Varden masters, they're able to take souls into the high God worlds. It's not that they're better than other people. It's simply that they've reached those planes already. And so they act as spiritual guides. And so they teach souls how to do this. So what you saw, it's hard to, exactly identify exactly where it was. Mm-hmm. It could have been the astral, or it could have been the causal plane. But you were actually witnessing that process, that incarnation process.
Yeah, and what you said is, I felt like, these souls were being told where to go, and there was no arguing that these three intelligent beings had jurisdiction over any decisions.
Right.
And that's why I felt, oh boy, I'm not supposed to be here because I'm still living my life. You know what I mean? And it's like, and it was kind of scary because you couldn't argue with them.
No, but what you can do, and this is really cool, believe it or not. What you can do is when you're working with these spiritual travelers, they can circumvent these lords of karma. They're above them in consciousness. So they can circumvent them under certain conditions. But the person has to be totally sincere about gaining God. Anybody who comes on the path who just wants power, or they want psychic abilities, or they want, something of a lower nature, is probably not going to go very far. They'll still have experiences and they'll still have fun and learn stuff. But anything below God, any goal besides reaching the higher worlds and becoming a coworker with God, anything below that is really like you're playing a game.
Mm-hmm.
And we've all played these games where we want certain qualities, we want certain people in our lives. It's like, give me this, give me that. It's like going on a shopping trip. And we can do that. We're free to do that. We're given total freedom to experience whatever we want to experience, but we have to pay the price. So if we want to be really rich, or we want to have the most amazing relationship we can think of, or whatever it is that we want to do, we're free to get those things, but it may take us a while. We may have to go through several incarnations, or we might get it very quickly, but we have to pay the price. And so when people put, the things of this world above God, and when I say God, I don't mean the God of the Christian church, the God that looks like a big giant guy,
right,
with a robe that's got a booming voice. We're not talking about that at all. We're talking about the real God, which is neither male nor female. But when you put your priorities on actually experiencing these higher planes, then the spiritual travelers can come in. Absolutely. And they can circumvent these lords of karma. There's no need to be afraid of them, but I can see why you can be afraid of them, because they've been, for the most part, controlling our lives up until we meet the spiritual traveler and we learn to surrender to him and follow him, just like you'd follow like a master tennis player or a master golf player or a master musician to learn from him. Until we reach that point, we are really kind of in a way under their mercy.
Absolutely. And I'd like to intervene here and say that I've learned over the years that I have a relationship with not only the spirit world, but also higher consciousness and the universe. And when I say the universe, especially when I do some of my readings and I talk publicly, the universe includes the creator, God, whatever you want to call it, because when people say God, it's like, who's God? Roman God, Greek God, we can go on and on and on. There's versions of God based on man's limited beliefs. And I'm saying Absolutely. Limited beliefs, because the creator is not limited. He's always creating.
Right.
So there's the creator that's part of the universe. There is loved ones that have passed on, go back to the universe. They're always a part of it. You have these other enlightened beings. You have other creations that we have yet to identify or fully understand. And then we have angels in various forms that are here to assist us. So that's when I say universe is building that relationship, having that relationship, communicating with them, and then being very open to receive, whether it's warnings or whether it's to receive signs of opportunity. In that opportunity, you can also have conscious growth in understanding, going beyond your human mind limitations and realizing all the other possibilities that we have that can come into realization and manifestation within this life. What I've found is that working with some of these beings, understanding some of these beings or these travelers, so to speak, you can receive messages both in the physical plane as well as travel or become consciously aware that you're in another plane that they take you to show you something new. In your research and your own experiences, before we get to talking about traveling, returning to God, let's talk about all those things that are in between. The travelers and the individuals, the enlightened beings that you and others have come in contact with. Can you share some stories?
Absolutely. I should probably let Heather have a chance, though. I'd love to. But,
no, you can. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, because I don't want to dominate. I'm really enjoying this, by the way. Chris, I'm really having a great time here.
Excellent.
Where do I begin? That's such a good question.
No.
Well, I'll give a couple quick analogies here. And that, because I've had a lot of experiences, and a lot of people have had a lot of experiences. First of all, it's like when Heather was talking about the 12 different levels, it's kind of like when you look at a map of the United States and you have that you list the states. It's like within each state is like all these counties and all these cities and all these rivers and houses and roads. And so it's like when we say there's 12 different planes or 12 different levels of heaven, within each of those levels are many, 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 like countless regions.
Many mansions in my Father's home.
Right,
Yes.
exactly.
Yes.
And each one of these levels is its own level. But, for example, the physical is huge. I mean, people are beginning to realize, we're getting all these, I don't know what your feelings are about this, but we're getting all these contacts from different ETs, from different star systems and all of this. And you could go on for hours on that. We're not going to, because that's not the topic. But it's I'm just validating. It's real, of course. And the ones that are visiting us are just a tiny, 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 minuscule percentage of the ones that exist. And so the physical is huge. Then you have what you call the superphysical, which are various vibrations which are slightly higher than where we are now. And so as you go higher and higher in the vibrations, things appear to start to disappear. And this is the area of ghosts, paranormal. Like if somebody's like a poltergeist, or when somebody sees something but they can't quite see it, but they know it's there, and maybe they hear some noises or something falls in the middle of the night, and it's like, but you can't see it. But then when you take a photograph with the right camera, you can see it, you kind of sort of see it. It's kind of that vibration that's just a hair above the human sensory perceptions. You see, now that's what I guess you could call that loosely the superphysical. And and there are actually, for example, there's a temple located on Venus that's run by Rami Nuri. He's one of the Vardan Adepts. And this temple is super physical. You can take a space probe and you can look and you won't see it. But people visit there constantly during the dream state. And so if your vibrations are high enough, you'll see these super physical beings. And then it keeps going. It's a little bit like an AM/FM radio. I know you probably remember the days before they had digital tuners, where you kind of turn the dial real slow and you can hear all kinds of noises.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. It wasn't fixed like a computer. So you go through the physical, and you've got all these phenomena, poltergeists. You've got UFOs that just disappear for no apparent reason.
We've got the different dimensions and consciousness is actually one of the ways that goes into those dimensions.
Right.
Is consciousness, our physical body and our human mind is what keeps us within this realm. But yet consciousness, we have this false belief that our consciousness only exists in this realm, yet consciousness is connected to the frequency that accesses all realms.
Exactly. And so it's all about frequency. And what is frequency but sound? It's vibratory rate.
Mm-hmm.
That's what manifests everything, and that's what brings you back, is this vibratory rate or sound. Light and sound is what everything is made out of, consciousness. And so when you want to talk about everything in the middle, it's a tall order. So what we do is just out of necessity, just like if I wanted to go from California to New York, if I mentioned every single side street and every single house and address and river and stream and bridge, and the directions would be super, super long and real confusing. So I do a short version of it. I'll list like highways, like get on this highway and go 400 miles, and then get on that highway. I'm leaving out a lot of details. And so I want to clarify that. And so you get through the physical into the superphysical, and then the superphysical has various states, and then you reach the astral, and the astral is more so. And so now you're starting to deal with all kinds of stories that you hear from different people, and of course people's expectations. Like you were saying, their consciousness is attuned. It's like you attract the vibration that you have. So if you're expecting gloom and doom, people tend to attract that.
Mm-hmm.
If they're expecting depression, they attract depression. So you've got all these vibrations, and you move through the astral plane, and it's absolutely huge. There are buildings that are tremendously large because you're not dealing with the cost restraints and the same gravitational restraints. I mean, if I want to build a gigantic building on Earth, it reaches a point where it's just not possible. You know, the costs involved and the fact that the stone is so heavy but on the astral plane, because there's less matter, those buildings can be huge. There's an astral museum which has all the inventions of the past, present, and future, and some of the greatest inventors have come to this museum, this huge museum, and they've seen the inventions, and then they would copy them, and they would end up building them.
Yeah, I've heard with Einstein and Tesla, you know, they believe that there was this universal consciousness and connecting with that and pulling from the universe to assist them in some of their technology. But when we talk about, you know, these out-of-body experiences and this soul traveling or astral traveling, people come in contact with these beings. Can you share with us some of these beings that people come in contact with?
Heather, did you want to chime in?
Sure. Well, I have to say that different beings, it's kind of like Alan has said, is that different beings will reach different planes where they serve souls, and the way I like to see it is that the guide that we choose, when we choose a guide, we're also choosing a destination, because, you know, as he was saying, the traveler or spirit guide or angel or whatever being can only take us to the level of heaven or plane that it resides, and since in all of these levels of heaven, the beings can be very celestial and very wise. You know, we have to discern. We have to have right discernment or right discrimination to discern the level of consciousness that we are attuning ourselves to. Mm. So, for example, you know, some people will choose certain types of guides who have their permanent home within the astral plane. The higher astral plane is very profoundly beautiful. There are cities of light in the higher astral plane. It becomes much more bright the higher you go. You know, for example, in the mental plane, the low mental plane, it can be pretty brilliant white there. So white that we feel that we found God, that God is there. A lot of people don't realize that there are different very powerful entities in these planes that are like creators, but they're not really God, but they appear to be.
Right.
And it's the same way. There are these different entities. We'll encounter angels and spirit guides and different kinds of beings. But each of these workers in these different planes have different purposes. And when we can discern what it is our goal is, it's sort of like Alan was saying about the map going across the country. If we don't truly have it in our heart what our destination is, if, for instance, if our destination is we want to return to God in this lifetime, then we will end up, and that desire is very strong, then we will end up more swiftly moving towards that goal. But if we're not certain, and we have, you know, many different goals, or we have love of the things in the lower worlds, what happens is we end up getting stuck in detours and side tracks, and what happens is there's so many different fascinations in these different planes that we can get stuck and not know it. Related to different guides, you know, there are a lot of people that work with different kinds of spiritual guides, and they can bring them to certain types of goals, but usually the goals depend on which plane they're bringing the soul to.
Or what aspect of life they're working on with the person.
Or what aspect of life they're working on.
That's another factor, is that for, you know, if you look at, I'm sure you know this, Chris, you know, you look at different people and somebody will specialize in working with nature spirits, for example. I mean, I've heard stories of farmers that worked with nature spirits and they were able to grow crops that were twice, 2 or 3 times the size of the average crop. And everybody couldn't understand how they did it. Mm-hmm. You know, it's because they're working with these beings that are nature spirits. That's their job, is to help plants grow and to help to protect plants and work with plants. And there are other spirits that work with animals. And there are, you know, fairies, and there's so all this stuff that people tell their kids isn't true. Most of that is real.
Right.
And the kids are saying, "Daddy, there's an elf, and he's talking to me." And the father's like, "Oh, you have such a good imagination, son." Well, there probably is an elf talking to his son.
Right.
And it's like Peter Pan. It's like a lot of this stuff is really real, and people try to invalidate it. So you have many, many different entities and beings that are forming, that have different jobs and different purposes. Right. There are what they call planetary spirits that manage, planets, and they work. As Einstein used to say, there's no, God doesn't play dice with the universe. It's like there's an order to all of this, and people will often say, like, "Wow, it's amazing, like that everything doesn't just crash into itself." And then, of course, sometimes it does, but even that is according to divine plan. So you're dealing with, I'm sure the three of us could probably make a long list, and it would be incomplete. But you have the different groups of angels that work on different things. Like, for example, if somebody's dealing with a particularly difficult issue, let's say they have an anger issue, and maybe they were a soldier in a past life, and they watched their family murdered when they were very young, so they developed a lot of hatred toward a particular race because they watched their family slaughtered. So they became a soldier and they fought and went into battle with swords, and so there was sort of like a feud going on. And now they've developed all this anger, and so there might be an angel or a being that would work with them to try to resolve this. And somebody else might have some other issues that need to be resolved, and the Lords of Karma will work with these people, and they will put them into certain situations that will help them resolve these various issues that they have, which are holding them back. And sometimes these people are creating karma, and so they need to learn certain issues. So there's whole groups of beings that work on the education of souls in regard to these kind of things like negative energy, the five passions: anger, lust, greed, attachment, vanity. There's all these learning lessons that people want to learn, or that are learning, and so there's whole administrative groups of angels and guides and teachers and various beings that work on lessons and sort of like planning lessons for children. And so that's a whole group of beings. And none of these beings are inferior in a sense. I mean, they all have different jobs. It's like saying the person that teaches kids how to drive, is he a worse person than the person that teaches kids how to cook? He's just a different job. And so you have all of this, and then you have administrators that work on keeping things running. You've got spirits that work with the weather, and spirits that work with nature and plants and animals. And it's just a huge amount of beings that have different jobs on different planes. And so the Varden masters, or the spiritual travelers, they have a specific job, and that job transcends all the various lower planes. And basically their job is to bring souls who wish to return back to God. But as you're pointing out, Chris, you got to go through all these other stages.
Right.
And you have to. It's like the reason we have these lower bodies is, well, it's for our education, but there's another reason, and that is because we need them to serve down here as a channel for God or for spirit or whatever you want to call it. We need these bodies to serve, because without these bodies we can't interact with beings in these planes.
Right. In your book, you mentioned the necessity, and you talk about these beings, is to having a competent spiritual traveler or teacher or a spirit guide, how important it is. But why isn't it that, why can't people just study on their own?
Well, actually, I thought that there was a very good example that a master Peter Zask once said, which is that a baby in the physical body needs a mother with a physical body for nourishment. In other words, the baby can't rely on a deceased mother to get nourishment. And also it's the same with a spiritual traveler, master and student, teacher and student, is that a student in the physical body needs a master in the physical body in order to make a link up on the different levels of his beingness, his consciousness. And so one of the reasons why it's so important to work with a proper guide, a guide who's truly an expert at these different levels, is that there are so many illusions and traps and detours in the lower worlds that many souls get trapped or stuck in a certain vibration or a certain region of consciousness that looks very enlightened and profound, but it's actually just one, it's just like a stop along the highway on the way down the road, but there are a lot of traps and detours like that. And one of the things that the spiritual traveler does is work with the individual so that they have a more direct route, because he knows what all the detours are and the obstacles, because he takes upon himself the karmic accounts of the individual, and the lords of karma can no longer touch him. He is able to work with the individual in a very direct way so that he can accomplish a lot sooner what would otherwise take him a lot longer. So, for example, it actually reminds me a little bit of a scene in The Matrix where he's downloading how to do kung fu or something like that, and he just instantly knows it. Well, without a body travel, when we move to these higher states of consciousness and leave our physical body and visit these planes, sometimes it's almost like a tree. We can start with a tiny little planting, a little seed in the ground, and then all of a sudden, like within moments, that little sapling becomes like a 200-year-old tree. Well, this can happen without a body travel, where we can have a lot of spiritual growth in a shorter amount of time because we're able to let spirit move us, surrender to divine spirit, and it can bring us much further than we can go on our own. Because a lot of people become, actually, I think this is a good example. I think Alan G might have given this once, where he said that the Cal, or the negative power, is like the grandmaster chess player, and the soul, the individual, is like a small child of 3. We can get all arrogant and cocky and sort of say, well, I'm enlightened and I can just do this on my own. And the cow can even give us, the negative power can give us the illusion that we're winning a few games. But in actuality, if we're so arrogant to think that we can, beat the negative power at its game, it's sort of it can be a little naive because it's very easy to get trapped in these lower planes. A lot of people, when they don't work with a true ardent spiritual traveler, they get stuck in the astral or causal plane, and they're having all these enlightening experiences. And why wouldn't they think that that's the end in eternity? Because a lot of these planes are designed to give the illusion of great enlightenment when we haven't gotten there, and that's a risk.
I was going to say there's located in between each plane is a zone that is like a dark zone, which makes it appear that there's nothing beyond it. And the biggest one of all, the most dramatic one, is the void, and that's between the etheric plane and the soul plane. But there's other regions of darkness which, somebody's in the astral plane, they reach a certain zone, and anything beyond that appears to be just darkness. And so the conclusion is that that's God above there, or maybe that's the end of it. They stop.
That's hell.
Yeah, but just to give a quick continuation of the answer. Actually, the answer is you don't have to have a guide, a spiritual guide, but it's a lot of wear and tear on the body, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot more work to try to attempt it on your own. It's sort of like if you wanted to be a really great tennis player, or a really great musician, or whatever it is you want to be really good at it. It's going to be a lot easier to do it with a really good teacher than it is to just do it on your own.
That makes sense. And plus, they can see things from a perspective that we can't. I mean, we're used to only seeing up, down from a 3D dimension. When you go into the 4th dimension, multiple dimensions, from seeing not only all directions around you, but seeing within every person you come in contact with and those yet to come in contact with based on time or space, that those beings, those spirits, I mean, they know what's coming or the various possibilities of what's coming to help guide you on the right path.
Yes, exactly. So you can try to do it on your own. It's like that's the one of the cool things about what's that?
It takes a lot longer.
It takes a lot longer. It's a lot more difficult. It takes a lot longer. It's a lot slower. The problem is, as Paul Twitchell used to say, is the problem is that if you don't make it in this lifetime to God, what guarantee is there that you're going to make it in the next lifetime? So, there's this tendency for people to think they have all the time in the world, if it takes me 100 lifetimes or a million lifetimes or whatever, got all the time in the world. Well, the problem is the veil of forgetfulness comes across us.
Yep.
So we go through a lifetime, and the only thing we get to keep is our state of consciousness, really. I mean, you can have $1 billion, and you can have the greatest relationship, and you can have all these things, and you can be a really good person. But then when you finally translate or pass over to the other side, the only thing you're really going to take with you is your state of consciousness.
Sure.
And so if that state is, let's say, the astral or the causal or whatever state it is, that's what you've got left. And so when you get to that point and you meet those beings, like the ones that you met, the Lords of Karma, it's not that they're trying to punish you or anything. It's just the game isn't over yet. You're not finished yet.
Right.
So now you come back down, but you got this veil of forgetfulness. So now you're starting out in a baby body, and maybe you remember, maybe you don't. I mean, I know I remembered some things, but I certainly didn't remember everything. And it's kind of an act of compassion on the part of the universe and God that we don't remember everything. Because can you imagine remembering that you've had 10 million lifetimes or whatever it is, and that and all the things you've been through, the times you've drowned and beheaded, and all the people you've loved, and it's like it would be really hard to live our lifetime if we had all these memories flooding in on us about everything we've ever done.
We would be comparing to a lot of them as well. We've only got a couple minutes left, so I want to ask you this. In your book, Thousands of Visits to Heaven and the Heart of God, you talk about out-of-body travel as a way of returning to God. What do you mean by that?
Well, by learning out-of-body travel, like I said before, it's like a shortcut or a direct path. So instead of having to go through a long progression of experiences or education, because the lower worlds are sort of like, as he was saying, an education system for soul, we can bypass a lot of that and take a more direct route home to God. Because when we leave our physical body and we dwell in our pure, true self soul, the flesh is the false self, and we're dwelling as soul, we can be brought, it's sort of like letting God steer the ship of soul, allowing God to show us, to give us an education and show us how to transcend all of this. And it's a more direct path, because the master himself, the person who's the master or the spiritual teacher, he's been trained very in depth in how to help souls take these steps so that they can sort of like avoid a lot of the pitfalls, the traps, and things like this that would otherwise take a lot longer to work through. And by visiting these different planes, like he was saying, they're temples of golden wisdom, we can get a spiritual education and learn how to reach self-realization and God-realization and mastership.
It's really individual experience. In other words, it's not about talking about it or analyzing it or understanding it from a mental viewpoint. It's about actually going into these planes and having the experience. And until you have the experience, it's just all hypothetical, kind of like hearsay.
Right.
And so that would be the main point.
Okay. Alan, you talked about sound and said there's a specific sound to connect.
Yes. I don't know if we have like a minute or not. I know
I'll give you a minute.
Okay, if we may be allowed to demonstrate
45 seconds to a minute. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. the word is Hugh, and I'm going to chant it. It's to be chanted. It's H-U, the H, and then U. I'm just going to do it a couple times since we don't have much time. H-U, H-U. And we simply empty our vessel of what we think we know, because you can't receive if your glass is full of water.
Sure.
You can't receive any more. And do that with total humility. And that is the sound current is the voice of God. It's the part that sustains all the worlds, and it's the part that leads soul back. And it comes in two waves: the ascending wave, which goes down and manifests everything, and the returning wave, which goes back into the heart of God, and that will take you higher.
Wow, I want to say this real quick, and a lot of my listeners are going to know this, is one of my experiences on the other side. The woman took my hand, a very famous person when she was here, but it really didn't matter. And I was walking with her through heaven, and I said, wow, this is heaven? She says, no, this is my heaven. Yours will be even more beautiful. But the one thing that I noticed while I was there, the flowers, the grass, the air, the water, the trees, all had this sound, this frequency, this tone. And in this tone, as they were releasing this tone in unison, in harmony, it was being directed directly to the Creator, and it was coming right back to them. This unending conditional love that was being sent and received. Sent and received.
Beautiful experience.
Yes.
You can chant different words for different planes too. And I just wanted, the last thing is, the Vardankar website has a God Worlds chart, and there's also a lot of free videos. So if anybody wants more information, there's a lot of free information.
Yeah, let's talk about that right now. Now, you guys have your websites. You got Alan and Heather's website is www.vardankar.com, which is VARDANKAR. Once again, VARDANKAR.com. We'll have this link up on the website also. Listeners can contact Alan and Heather here. Now, for their books, both of their books, they can be found on Amazon. First book is
That's correct.
First book is Thousands of Visits to Heaven and the Heart of God, the most profound, vividly detailed of out-of-body discoveries yet. And the next book is Dialogues with the Masters, The Way Back to God via Soul Flight. Now, you can go check those out on Amazon and purchase them. And then, as Alan was suggesting here, is they've got video talks on YouTube, Out-of-Body Travel to God Realization, under Vardankar, VARDANKAR. And for them to search on YouTube, they just type in Vardankar?
Yes, they can type in Vardankar and look for out-of-body travel to God realization.
And there's also links to from the website too. So
wonderful, wonderful. Well, everybody, check it out. And I want to thank you, Alan and Heather. This was enlightening. This was wonderful, and I know my listeners are going to enjoy this. Any last words?
Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you, Chris,
for having us. We'd love to come back again someday in the future if you ever would like to talk to us.
Oh, you've got it. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Your inspiring stories. Your stories were very inspiring.
Yes, they were.
All of us are adding to this frequency of inspiring others and continuing the frequency to grow to higher realms. This is Chris Fleming, Alan and Heather. Thanks for listening to this edition of Spirit Talk.